Welcome to the Homesteading for Beginners podcast. This is Mona Weathers, your host. Today we have a special guest. We're continuing on with the Healthy Homesteading theme series that I'll be compiling over the next couple of weeks. And today we're talking about the ketogenic diet and homesteading. So we're talking to my guest, Robert Sikes, and it's a really good interview. I hope you enjoy this. So let's get right into it. So I always seem to start my interviews with, so I met so-and-so on this social media app. And although it was a social media app where we met, our introduction was through a mutual friend, Adam Shively. And then we started communicating on Instagram. I've been following Adam's podcast for a long time, and I remember him mentioning a buddy he had that was interested in homesteading. So this is my guest today. Okay, so a few months later, he introduced us, and you invited me, my guest, Robert, invited me on to your podcast, and we had such a great conversation that we wanted to continue it, and I wanted to have you on my podcast. So here you are, and today we're kind of switching gears with the podcast, and we're talking about health, which is a big part of my journey. Actually, my homesteading and health journey are very close together, and so I wanted Robert to help us understand a certain health method, the keto diet, and share his health story. So welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to continue our conversation and learn from you this time.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to catch up and chat again.
Thank you. Okay, so the reason, like I mentioned before, I'm having you on the podcast is because homesteading can improve mental health, and a lot of people get into homesteading for this reason, mental and physical health, but we have to kind of choose it. So we have to, decide that's what it's going to do. And so if you're raising your own food, no matter what style, if you're raising or growing your own food in whatever style it is, it's probably better than what you're getting from the grocery store. So you're ahead of a lot of people if you're homesteading already. But the topic of health comes up a lot in the homesteading space for a good reason. So many of us are homesteading because we see it as the healthiest option. That was for me. When I started raising my kids, I started seeing like, okay, I want the best food for my children. And so that's not exactly how it started, but that's how it continued because I wanted the best for my family. So I want to offer my listeners ways to improve their health with this lifestyle. And that also starts with the decisions we make in the kitchen, basically. But first, I would love to hear more about you and help us understand your story and how you got into the keto diet and that sort of thing. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, your family, your own health journey that brought you to the keto diet?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been natural bodybuilding for about 14 years now. And then originally I started doing the traditional bodybuilding diets of eating 6 or 7 meals a day, every 2 or 3 hours, really high protein, really high carbohydrates, very low dietary fat. And that worked in the sense that I was able to get very lean. I won several competitions, but I never felt great. I would diet down really aggressively. I'd lose a ton of body fats, but I would not feel very good physically or mentally. And honestly, after my first competition, I really struggled with disordered eating tendencies after that first prep. I lost about 80 pounds in 12 weeks, very unhealthily. I lost a lot of muscle in that process as well. And then after the shows were over, I regained a lot of that weight relatively quickly. And it was all coming from me eating I ate a lot of protein and, like I said, carbohydrates, but a lot of it was processed food. I was pretty broke at the time. I was in college, so I was eating cheap foods, microwavable foods, and it was just never really optimal from a health or performance standpoint. So I started dabbling in different types of diets, and I discovered the ketogenic diets after my third competition, which was right there at the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015. And I started diving into that. And at that time, keto was not popular. There wasn't really any books or podcasts or information about the diet out there. But I just removed the carbohydrates and felt much better. And I felt much more in tune with what my body needed. So rather than going through the binging and purging tendencies that I had previously, I was able to just simply remove the carbohydrates, eat ample fat and protein, and I felt great. And I didn't feel guilty because the foods that I was eating was all real food. I mean, if you remove the carbohydrates and you're eating just fats and proteins, like it's pretty much just single ingredient, whole natural foods. So I felt great in that regard. I didn't feel guilty with the foods I was eating. And I decided to compete again with a ketogenic approach. And I earned my pro card status with that ketogenic competition prep. And I've since pretty much just refined and polished the methods behind dieting with a ketogenic approach. But then all the while, I've just loved the outdoors. I've always grown up hunting, procuring my own food when possible. And when you look at what the ketogenic diet is at its core, it's a high fat, moderate protein, very low carbohydrate diet consisting of quality foods, ideally single ingredient natural foods that are either, grown or harvested in some form or fashion. So homesteading, being self-sufficient, following a ketogenic diet, in my mind, are they go hand in hand. They're perfect together. So that's been a big passion of mine, just simply optimizing my health and then being as sufficient as I can with my own, food sources. So homesteading and bodybuilding and the ketogenic diet sounds like an interesting combination, but it all melds together very beautifully in my life.
Yeah, and I'll probably never have another bodybuilder on my show. Maybe I will. I don't know, but I never thought I would be saying that I have a bodybuilder. And you're very successful too, as well, right? How did that start? How did you get into the bodybuilding?
So when I was in high school, I was super small. I was 115 pounds soaking wet, and I just didn't have any build. I was pretty scrawny, and I think that kind of hindered my confidence, especially when it came to talking to the ladies and things like that. I just didn't feel good about myself. So I wanted to build up my body, build up my confidence. And my parents didn't work out at all. So my uncle, he kind of took me under his wing and showed me how to do a few movements. I just loved how I could work at something and then see the byproduct of that work. Like, it wasn't a team sport like soccer or basketball in which I was beholden to relying on other people. It was just simply me against me. And the success I saw or didn't see was a direct result of the work I put in or didn't put in. So I really liked that, singularity with regard to the sport. It's just awesome seeing yourself, develop and grow and improve on a regular basis because you're putting in the work with your training and with your food choices. So for me, it's just always been a great way to kind of self-impose a hardship in my own life, an adversity of some sort that results in me getting better and better and better. And honestly, it's taught me so much from like a discipline and dedication and consistency standpoint that has transcended the sport and became a part of my business endeavors and my relationships and how I parent and how I try to live my life. I mean, a lot of the life lessons I've learned are a direct result of what I've learned from bodybuilding.
That's amazing. That's so true of a lot of sports too. I would say the same thing with horse riding and training horses, and the consistency, the perseverance, and just those are all things that can go in so many areas of your life and things that you can learn. So I love that. You mentioned the ladies. Is your wife, how did you meet your wife in that? Was she part of that? Noticed you because
no, actually, after I graduated college, I got a job as a train master on the Burlington Orleans Santa Fe Railroad. So I moved from Arkansas to Washington State, and I bought a house 2 blocks down from this coffee stand. And there was this cute little barista working the coffee stand, and I started drinking a lot more coffee because there was a cute barista there. And lo and behold, that worked out well, and now we're married and have a little kiddo. But interestingly enough, her dreams and aspirations in life were to simply, have some land, have a family, and raise some pigs. So it kind of worked out well from promoting that homesteading endeavors, because that's what she's passionate about too. So she trained, she's competed, she won her competition, and now she's just focused on being the healthiest mother she can be for raising our son. And you really look at, childhood development and how they develop, especially in those early years. Nutrition is so critical, both when the mother is pregnant, and before pregnancy even, but especially when she's pregnant, and then those first several years of development in the child. And eating a quality, nutritious diet ideally one that you do procure your own food from, is going to develop that child's brain and body in ways that they'll never be able to try and recover from if they were brought up with a standard American diet, eating a bunch of highly palatable processed foods.
Yes, that is so true. And that, like I said earlier, that was a big reason we continued on with homesteading, because we saw our two oldest children were 10 and 8, I think, when we first got our property. And so our youngest was born and raised on the homestead. And I could just see such a difference. Was about 4 years old. When she was about 4 years old is when I started realizing our health choices, and that they can affect her as well. It was actually her teeth. Her teeth were falling apart really easily. And then I found books and started doing research and realized she didn't have enough minerals in her diet. And then all of the things that we were eating at that time, because I was just beginning my health journey. And it makes such a difference. And so that's why I decided to get goats for milk. And she was raised on goat milks, and, from 4 on about, and just all of those things. It was like my driving force was pretty much my children at that point,
Yeah.
So I love
awesome
that you're starting so early.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of parents, like especially like our son just turned 1, and so many parents complain about their child having just like temper tantrums and outbursts, terrible twos, as they call it. And it's like so much of that is simply a result of them eating sugary foods, causing a massive spike in their blood sugar and insulin levels, which then drops down drastically and crashes. So they have they're really, from a glycemic index standpoint, they're all over the board. Like they don't have any stability in their blood sugar levels. And if you simply give them fats and proteins, that will bypass so much of those attitude concerns and issues. So like from a parenting standpoint, like parenting would likely be much easier and less stressful if you're simply giving your children quality food.
Yeah. And then a lot of those sugary foods include the dyes that do a whole nother thing. So yeah, I have a nephew that you can just see the difference between him after he's eaten red dye. Like he just turns into a monster, his mom says that. But yeah, there's so much that can be improved if you just eliminate certain things from their diet. My daughter, thankfully, my oldest daughter, she's got most of my grandkids. So she's about to actually have her 4th next month. So she'll actually have a home birth here at our property. In her apartment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Very cool.
But
Yeah, the home birth thing is awesome. I think, like it's funny, you start diving into nutrition and that goes down this all different rabbit holes. And we were, all on board with the home birth as well. So yeah, you realize how much better if you go the natural route things are for your sanity, for your health. Like so much of the stuff that is pushed on us from like a medical standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, is just simply not optimal from a health standpoint. So yeah, I'm glad that she's going the home birth route for sure.
Yeah, this is her. Well, she had she tried with the first 2, but ended up in the hospital. And then the 3rd one was at a birthing center. So hopefully this one will actually be all at home. That's her hope. And I am so new to this topic, really. I haven't looked into keto that much. So can you speak to me like a beginner and tell me what a keto diet really is?
Yeah, so from a very high level, a ketogenic diet is simply a diet that facilitates fat metabolism. So when you are born as an infant and you're feeding off of your mother's milk, there is some natural sugars in that for sure, but it's relatively ketonic by nature. It's higher in dietary fat. So your body is producing ketones and fat adapted at birth. And then from birth, we're pretty much inundated with all the carbohydrates that society throws on us. You get the juices, the cereals, the carbohydrates, and then from there, you pretty much lose that fat metabolism and you become dependent upon glucose and sugars and carbohydrates for energy. And most people spend the vast majority of their life, apart from their infancy years, burning glucose and carbohydrates for fuel. The problem with that is there's a lot of different problems with that. Namely, one being that people don't have the ability to tap into their fat stores and metabolize fat as a fuel source. When you adopt a ketogenic diet, there are a couple of different ways to tap into that stored fat. You can do fasting, or you can simply do a diet that incentivizes your body to use fat as a fuel source. So when you remove the carbohydrates, the glucose from your intake, your body becomes fat adapted and can then tap into the dietary fat that you consume and your stored adipose tissue, body fat, as a primary fuel source. And when you look at fat as a fuel compared to that of carbohydrates, it's got a much longer, much broader tank of energy to tap into, for instance. So even if you're a lean individual, you don't have that much carbohydrate that you can store in glycogen in your liver and muscle tissue to use for fuel. But even a lean individual has a ton of stored fat that their body can tap into and use as a fuel source. So it's just a cleaner burning, more efficient way to energize your body's metabolic demands, basically.
Okay. So give me an example of a keto meal. Like, just give me an example of something that you would eat, like for breakfast, lunch, or dinner or something.
Yeah, so a really good place to start when it comes to ketogenic meals is to simply try and adopt, a 1-to-1 ratio of protein grams to fat grams. That's going to result in about a 68 to 70% of your calories coming from dietary fat, because fat has more calories per gram than protein does. So an example meal would be like steak and eggs, things of that nature, things that are high in both fat and protein. You do want to have protein. You don't want to just have dietary fat. It's important to have both. But standard meals for me are a lot of animal-based foods. So cheeses, some dairy, heavy cream, things of that nature. Sometimes I'll do nuts and things like that, but I don't do a whole lot of nuts. Mostly just animal-based proteins and quality fats like olive oil, avocado oil, cacao butter is a great source of dietary fat. But it's really just like naturally occurring fats and proteins that you find in nature.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about vegetables as well? Like, is that something that you consume regularly as well?
So it's interesting. Vegetables, like if you Google keto diet, you'll typically get a picture of a plate with an avocado on there, fillet of salmon, and a whole bunch of green leafy vegetables. And as of late, there's been this big push towards a carnivorous diet, which is basically a subset of keto because you're still metabolizing fat for fuel via a carnivore diet. But the carnivore diet is pretty much the complete removal of vegetation. I fall somewhere in the middle. I'm not a hardcore carnivore in that I don't ever eat vegetables, but I'm also of the opinion that you don't really need vegetables, which is kind of crazy to say because our whole life we're taught that vegetables are crucial. You have to have the fiber. But I know a lot of hardcore carnivores that have no problem with their regularity and they consume zero fiber. So you certainly don't have to have the fiber. Once you adopt a new dietary protocol, your gut's microbiome changes and shifts to make use of the fuel substrate you're giving it. So you don't have to have fiber in order to stay regular. You don't have to have fiber to promote health. Fiber in the context of a standard American diet with a bunch of processed carbohydrates and just filler ingredients is advantageous because that fiber helps push that out of your system. But if you're only putting in quality fuels to begin with, you don't really need to force it through the system because your body is likely going to be using it all anyways. So I don't need a ton of vegetables, but I have a garden. So when I have a ripe, cucumber or zucchini, I work that into my macros and I don't feel guilty about it.
Okay, that's good information. You said earlier you talked about, so first I want to say, I have heard that, especially with vegetables that are like spinach and kales, those all actually should never be eaten raw. Have you heard that as well?
Yeah, so with some of those oxalates, for instance, spinach is really high in oxalates, and some people have a problem clearing oxalates from their system. Actually, one of my good friends, he would consume a ton of almonds. They're also very high in oxalates and spinach, and he was literally going blind as a result of it. Like their oxalate, most people don't have this issue, so I'm not trying to scare people that are eating spinach on a regular basis, but oxalates can accrue in your body if you're not clearing them properly. And it's basically like really sharp, tiny needles, like pieces of glass almost is what they look like under a microscope. And people that are having issues with clearing those oxalates, if they remove oxalate-containing foods for a time, they'll experience something called oxalate dumping. So their body, they'll start to see these like crystalline structures start extruding from their skin, like their body just tries to remove it via it coming through their pores, which is kind of crazy. Like I don't really want to consume anything that's going to result in oxalate buildup. So I don't eat a ton of vegetables that contain oxalates in them. However, if you cook them and prepare them in certain ways, you can certainly minimize that. Same is true with like lectins and some anti-nutrients that are found in certain plants.
Okay. That's good information. What about ferments? Does that fit into the keto diet, fermented
Yeah,
foods?
for sure. And if I do eat vegetables, honestly, the majority of them are fermented. So I'm a big fan of sauerkraut and pickles and kimchi and things of that nature. Because when you look at the fermentation process, when you consume vegetation, like if you consume a lot of vegetation, you have to ferment that food in order to extract any nutrients from it. That's why like a ruminant animal has a 4-chambered stomach to allow for that fermentation process to take place, and they can upregulate that nutrition and make use of it. We humans do not have a 4-chambered stomach. We're not ruminants. So our digestive tract is not well suited for extracting all the nutrients out of those vegetations. But if you're consuming them in a fermented state, you're kind of have half that work already done for you upon consumption. So that's a better way to go about eating vegetables for sure.
Okay. Yes. And culturally, like over time, ferments are in just about every culture. Every culture has something like that's fermented that they've consumed. The older type of cultures, their ancestry, over time, they always consumed ferments. So it's like this America and we've kind of lost that skill of learning how to consume ferments. So I'm always pushing
tasty.
ferments.
Like they're tasty. They're easily absorbed. They're typically going to result in less gas and bloating and GI distress. Like if you're consuming raw vegetation and it's having to ferment fully in your digestive tract, you're going to have a lot more bloat and GI distress. And you can bypass a lot of that by simply eating the fermented foods.
Yeah. I need to get back on my fermenting. I haven't done a whole lot of that lately. I want to go back to oils. You mentioned oils. This is another hot topic because so many people are consuming really bad oils. And can you speak to that? Because I think people need to hear this message.
Yeah, so there's tons of different types of fats. Like the ketogenic diet is oftentimes described as a high-fat diet, but the source and quality of those fats is important. So like you wouldn't want to make up the majority of your diet eating, peanut oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, things of that nature. When you look at the popular vegetable oils that are seen in most salad dressings, in many of the restaurants, what they're cooking with, there are cheaper types of oils. Like the chefs back in the back are not using high-grade olive oils because those are more expensive. They're using these really cheaply produced vegetable oils, which are much more volatile. They've got more free radicals. They're more likely to be rancid rather upon consumption. And when you look at the process to how these vegetable oils are made, like canola oil, for instance, it goes through this massive extraction process. It's deodorized because it's rancid. I mean, it's heated up so many times. The more you heat it up, the more rancid it becomes, the more free radicals you're going to have with it. And these fast food chains are just simply reheating it multiple times to deep fry their French fries, for instance. Every time you heat it up, you're damaging the particles in that oil. And when you look at this production process, they have to deodorize those because they stink so bad, because they're rancid, that if you were just to consume that naturally, you wouldn't be able to get it past your nose. It's kind of like our body's built-in mechanism to say, hey, that's not good, don't eat it. But since they deodorize it, it goes unnoticed. When you look at a quality olive oil or avocado oil, a monounsaturated fat like that, you're not going to have near that free radical issue. You're not going to have to worry about that causing near as much inflammation in the body. Same is true with saturated fats that are found in animal products. Like if you look at a stearic acid rich containing, like a beef suet or beef tallow or duck fat or egg yolk or something like that, like a naturally occurring saturated fat that's in animals, you're not going to have near that free radical issue either. So personally, for me, I consume all of my dietary fats coming from either the monounsaturated olive oils, avocado oils, or fish oils, saturated fats coming from animals. Not all polyunsaturated fats are, but generally speaking, the popular ones that are the vegetable oils of the world are not really going to be your best bet.
Okay, so what do you feel about coconut oil? I don't know if you didn't mention that one. How do you feel about
coconut oil? Is great too.
Okay.
Coconut oil is pretty high in lauric acid, so that's a really good source of dietary fat as well. Cacao butter is great. So yeah, some of these wholesome single ingredient fats that are procured, like if you look at olive oil, for instance, you can squeeze an olive and you can see the oil coming from the pores of that olive. It's a pretty natural extraction process. But if you look at canola oil, you can't squeeze a canola and really extract oil with your fingers. Like, it has to go through a much, deeper extraction process. And generally speaking, the more steps involved in extruding the oils from it, the more likely it has an opportunity to become rancid in the first place. So ideally, opting for fats that are pretty simple from a production standpoint is going to be key.
Okay. And they taste better to me. I don't know. Like, I love cooking in duck fat. You mentioned that when we were processing ducks. Duck fat is very tasty. And that's one thing I also feel like if you've been around long enough, you may have noticed the shift in fast food and the flavor of the food. Like, my husband and I talk about it all the time. I don't know what they did with the oil, but I know it's the oil that they started cooking these foods in. It changed over time. I'm pretty sure. I don't know if we were probably kids when this was the way it was, but they probably used pig fat. They probably used lard to cook French fries, totally. And even that. But now it tastes synthetic. Now fast food tastes synthetic, and it doesn't taste real anymore. We're always like so annoyed that we bought something because it's just like, this is not even good food.
Yeah, they used to use tallow too, like in a lot of the fast food chains, and none of that's used anymore because it's just cheaper to buy a massive jug of peanut oil or vegetable oil, some type, and they can reheat it more frequently. They're doing that from a cost standpoint, but it's certainly not optimal from a health standpoint. So ideally, if you're going to eat at a fast food place, what I would recommend doing is asking the cooks in the kitchen, what are you cooking this in? Some places like Five Guys burgers, for instance, they don't use any oil on the griddle. They'll just simply spray it with water and then put the patty right there on the griddle. So that's a better option for sure. I'm not sure what they're frying the fries in, so I wouldn't go for the fries. But if you were to go to a fast food joint, skip the bun, skip the fries, and ask them what oil they're using, that would be the best way to go for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I have this question, and this might be a very newbie question about keto. Is there any time it is okay to have the carbohydrates? Like, is that just something that's a guilty pleasure, or is it like, is there any time there's okay to have the carbohydrates, like breads or?
Yeah, so I don't ever want to, play into this fear mongering that goes around within the nutrition space. Like, if you're keto, you're banished to hell if you have a piece of bread. That's not the way it works. Like, your body will be able to still metabolize that bread. For me personally, as a performance athlete, I don't really want to test to see what I can get away with so much as I want to see what I can optimize and perform best with. So I don't have the breads. I don't have the carbohydrates. I haven't for the past 8 years. But that's not me saying that that's what everybody has to do. Like, you want to find the best diet for you that is sustainable. And if that's keto 90% of the time, and then every once in a while you have something that's not, but that makes staying keto the 90% of the time more sustainable for you, then I say more power to you. What you don't want to do, though, is kind of stay in this limbo land purgatory state in which you're halfway keto and then halfway eating carbs, because then your body's not really able to fully adapt for one or the other. So if you are going to go keto, you're going to benefit greatly from being strict with it for at least about 6 months. And then from that point, you can start to incorporate, some occasional carbs. And by being keto for 6 months prior to that incorporation of carbs, your body's going to be able to shift back and forth between fuel substrates much more efficient.
Okay, so that is really great information. And I would like to know how far you're into your homesteading setup. I know you guys are just getting started. Did you get your chickens yet? Because when I was on your podcast, you were about to get chickens. Did you get them?
Yes, we have chickens. We have the coop. We had 15 chickens, and then we got them from somebody. We looked at several different places. We found we were going to just get the chicks and then start from scratch. We had so much traveling to do that we couldn't really set aside like 8 weeks or something. You pretty much need to be at their beck and call when they're chicks in order to get them up and running. So we opted to get 15 full-grown laying hens to start with, and then we're going to get chicks later. And the place where we got the 15 hens from, it was kind of more of a commercial setting where they were under light for like 18 hours a day. So we brought them to our place. They started molting, which we were expecting, so no concerns there. But they're starting to pick up they're almost done with the molting phase, and they're starting to lay more frequently now, which is great. But we have had a little bit of a predator conundrum. We've started with 15 chickens, and now we're down to 10. So we're losing a few chickens, but I've buttoned up the coop a little bit more, and I think we're good, except for the hawks. The hawks are still a predator that we got to watch out for sure.
Yeah, they are terrible, and sometimes you don't know until you have the animals where the holes are, where the spots that need to be, because some of those predators can get really creative. Like raccoons are very very crafty, and they can figure out how to get into a lot of places. They can just pull chickens through the fence. I've had that happen. And the hawks, this is the first time I've had a hawk super we had lost one a couple months ago, and it got into an area that we thought we had secured enough to where a hawk wouldn't want to go into. Like there's just this little opening. Hawk got in there, and yeah, they can be really crafty. And then there's the really small predators like weasels that you're like, okay, how am I supposed to do this? Or the really large predators like bears. I've had friends that have like you can only do so much, but I'm sorry you lost your chickens, but that is part of the whole homesteading thing.
It comes with it for sure. And like with the coop that we have, there's like this little thin strip on both the sides where I don't think a raccoon could have gotten in it, but he could have gotten his arm through it, and that's kind of where they're roosting too. So my guess is that we lost 4 with a hawk and then 1 with a raccoon that got his arm through there. Because the chicken was still in there. Like he didn't even really eat the chicken. So I buttoned up that thin strip that was open. So there shouldn't be any issues there now. But I feel bad because like I had just got the chickens acclimated to using the coop, going in there at night. And then this coon goes in there and kills one and terrifies them all. Now they don't want to go in the coop at night. So I've got to like retrain them to acclimate to the coop. So it's been a little bit of a headache there, but hopefully they'll figure it out.
Yeah, they will. They'll get it. But yeah, that's and you said you had a garden as well. You have a garden?
Yeah, we got the garden. We started with like some seedlings, like we planted the seeds and they were all taken off. We got one of those like 72 cell seed starter kits. We were all proud of it, planted that, and it was growing, flourishing. And then we left for a conference and came back 4 days later and everything was dead. So we tried to plant a few stragglers. They didn't make it. So we cheated a little bit. We went and just got some from the farmer's market that were a little bit more established, and we planted those in our raised beds, and those have all been taken off like crazy. Like we've got a zucchini right now that we harvested yesterday, and it was like biggest zucchini I've ever seen. Then it's cool to see that taken off. Like we got several hot peppers in there that are growing. We got some tomato plants that are taking off. So everything in the garden now is seeming to do pretty well.
That's awesome. Yeah, and there's nothing like having your own zucchini, eating the food from your garden. There's just nothing like it, eating the eggs from your own chickens. There's just, especially when you get those first ones, it's like even now after gardening for so long, I still get really excited about the first thing that I get to harvest from my garden. So it's great. But so how can people find you? I'm really glad you came on, and I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy this episode. And so I want them to know how they can find you and learn more about keto or even bodybuilding. So what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so any and all things Keto Savage, like ketosavage.com, Keto Savage on social. If you type in Keto Savage, you'll find me. Keto Brick is the name of our company that we make a ketogenic meal replacement bar. So Keto Brick, Keto Savage, that's how anybody can find me for sure.
Cool. Awesome. I think so. I sort of jokingly say to people that people don't need to go to a gym, own a gym membership if they just work on a farm. So you can get a workout, and you can maybe even get paid if you're working for somebody else. This may not be true for someone like you because you're actually trying to build certain specific muscles, but for like the average person, I always, joke around and say, why do you need a gym membership? So I'm going to, if you're willing to describe these things, I'm going to give you a few things that I do on my farm, or I have done, or my husband has done. Okay. And then you give me what it would be in a gym, like okay?
I love it. It's good.
Okay. So every day I lift a 20-pound bucket bucket, or about 20 pounds. It might be a bit more. I haven't weighed it, over my head to put into the horse's stall. So what would I be doing if I was in a gym? If I was putting something over my head, it's about 20 to 30 pounds maybe, because it's filled with water and feed. So it's pretty heavy. And I have to like lower it down slowly while a horse is trying to get their head into it. I don't know if you can, but what would that be?
It's on the ground when you're picking it up, right?
Yes.
Okay, so from the ground, depending on how you do, like if you lift with your legs or your back, you're going to have some squats incorporated there, or some like dumbbell rows, or like a deadlift to get it up to your shoulders. And from the shoulders, it's pretty much going to be all shoulder press to get it up over the fence. And then to tip it over gracefully and then bring it back, that's going to be a lot of shoulders as well. So yeah, mostly shoulders, getting it over your head like that with the overhead press. But yeah, a lot of legs and back to get it up to that high initially.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, it feels hard.
Yeah.
And I only do it a couple times a day. So I mean, I have 2 horses, and so every day I lift that and over my shoulders. But and then I have to pull it down slowly so it doesn't slop and fall out. So I could, of course, there could be easier ways to do this, and this is just the way we are doing it. So it's not like everybody.
It's hard work for sure. I mean, I was driving a bunch of T-posts the other day to make the fence for the chicken yard. And I mean, I was worn out after the T-post drive.
Yeah.
Okay. We live in a rocky area for sure, but yeah.
Is there an equivalent to T-post driving? Because I don't have that on my list. What would that be in a gym?
That's going to be a lot of shoulders as well, but it's going to be more like a front lateral raise, and depending on how close you're standing to the T-post driver. So probably like a little cross between a front lateral raise and an overhead press. And then when you go down with it, that's going to be mostly like a lat pull down. So you're going to have some lats in your back engaged there quite a bit.
Okay. My husband's going to love this part because I feel like he's such a hard worker, and this is how he keeps in shape, these things. Okay. So here's one that not a whole lot of people do, because it's just the way we have the round bales. So we have round bales of hay, which are about 800 pounds. And so we roll it off of our truck, and then we push it about 10 feet to the location it needs to be. And it's kind of on a little bit of an incline, so it can be hard. My husband does this alone. Okay.
Yeah.
So an 800-pound round bale of hay pushed about 10 feet.
All right. So you're going to have a lot of legs involved there for sure. You're going to have some calves. Anything like pushing like that, you're going to be engaging your chest quite a bit. So when you're actually pushing it, you're going to have like a chest press activation there. But then like just simply taking one step in front of the other and pushing off, like you're going to have some quads, some hamstrings, and some glutes involved quite a bit. So it's kind of like a sled push equivalent in the gym, a little bit of a lunge activity. I mean, it's going to be a pretty demanding exercise for sure. Yeah.
And my daughter and I actually, when he's not around, we have to do this ourselves. So I guess you would split that like 400. We're pushing 400 pounds.
That's still pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Farm work isn't for the, like you can really get a lot of exercise. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
And then this is not really one that is, I don't know. I used to milk about 3 gallons of milk a day when I had dairy goats. And so I'm using probably this part.
That's all forearms. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's going to be all forearms. And I honestly don't do a whole lot of forearm workout. Like I get some forearm training by just simply gripping the dumbbells and barbells that I'm training with. But milking, like you probably have a firmer handshake than me from milking that much. Like that's going to be all forearms involved there.
Okay. I haven't milked in a while, so this is what I used to do. But I know there's a lot of, if anybody's listening and they've milked cows, it's a lot harder than milking goats. So it's more, if they have several cows that they're milking, that's a lot. A lot of people get milking machines, though. That is an option. Okay, when I worked at a 40-horse farm, I used to work at a farm, and I did a lot of walking. I guess this would be this. So I would do like 20,000 steps probably, because it was a huge farm. So that would be like a treadmill, right?
Yeah, treadmill. I mean, just getting your steps in. But I mean, 20,000 steps, because you're probably like, pushing a wheelbarrow part of that time, or shoveling hay, or mucking a stall, or carrying a feed bag, and like that compared to just simply walking on a treadmill. Like 20,000 steps on the farm is going to be a lot different for sure.
Yeah,
that's harder.
True. Yeah. And so is there an equivalent to scooping manure? Like, is there anything anything that would be the same. I mean, I know you can tell us what muscles are being worked, but is there anything in a gym that would be the same?
So
Like,
with the scooping, like you're putting the shovel in front of you, and so that's kind of a different one. You're not really seeing a whole lot of that. Like if you were to, take the shovel and kind of scoop it behind you, that'd be a definite row equivalent, like a dumbbell or barbell or cable row. But if you're scooping it in front of you, I don't know of any specific exercise or machine that would equate to that. Because you're gonna have some pushing and then some pulling involved in the entire range of motion. So probably like a little cross between a dumbbell push press and then a dumbbell row, I guess would be the way to categorize it there.
So weeding like with a hoe or something would be like that
would be a definite row for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and then there's this last one. I don't know. Are there saunas in gyms? I'm like,
some of them, yeah.
They're okay. Because just being outside in Georgia in August, doing any work outside in Georgia in August, that's literally a sauna.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many benefits from heat exposure. You got like heat shock proteins. You get to sweat out a lot of the impurities. So yeah, any type of work like that in which you're sweating like crazy, then yeah, there's a lot of benefit to be had there. You can be burning calories just simply by being hot. So yeah, that would be a sauna, pretty close to a sauna equivalent. Like saunas get up to, typically saunas are, 120 degrees if you're going with the infrared saunas, but they'll oftentimes go north of 200 degrees if you're doing a traditional sauna. So being in the heat like that working is no joke, not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that was fun. I was hoping you'd be willing to help me with that, because I'm always thinking about that. Like, if I was in a gym, what would I be doing? And for me, honestly, I mean, with what you have to do, I totally understand it. But for me, honestly, it's more, I feel like I'm doing something. So the work is, I don't know, the work is better for me to like see a result outside of me, basically.
100%, 100%. Yeah. And like you can be absolutely healthy and never step foot in a gym as long as you're active. Like my dad does not go into a gym. He doesn't know what a bicep curl is, but he's incredibly active working on the farm, and he's very healthy at 62 years old. And he's built his body up through physical labor. Mm-hmm. I do what I do in the gym because this is a profession of mine. Like I have to build and sculpt my body like an artist would. Mm-hmm. So the tools of my trade, like an artist has a paintbrush, I've got a dumbbell, so I would not be able to likely sculpt to the degree that I want to if I was just doing, the farm work. But to simply be healthy and have a great physique and I mean, still have a very, very impressive physique, totally independent of training at a gym, is totally possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I like how you said that it's like an artist. You're like an artist and you're sculpting. That's actually a really good way to think about it. I love that. Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been super fun. And that's kind of all the questions I have for you today. I really had a great conversation. So thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you so much. I always enjoy chatting with you. I appreciate all the insight you gave me on my podcast when I had you on my show. And I appreciate you reciprocating. Let me come on to yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really had a great time talking with Robert. If you need any of those links that he mentioned, they are in the show notes, so go check those out. And that is it for today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, your day, wherever you are.